Welcome to today's deep dive. We are really thrilled you're joining us today because we have a truly fascinating source to explore with you.
You really do. It's a great one.
Yeah. So we're going to be taking a close look at a sermon transcript, and it's focused on the book of Jeremiah. Specifically, we're zeroing in on chapter 51 and this really profound concept of the new Exodus.
Right.
And the whole mission of our deep dive today is to take the historical and theological weight of this sermon and extract the practical insights for you, the listener, so you can understand what it actually means to navigate your own modern-day life with all its chaos without losing your faith.
Exactly. And it is a remarkable sermon. I mean, what makes it so compelling is how it takes these texts that are thousands of years old and, well, it reveals their immediate, almost urgent relevance to the cultural and political moments we're living in right now.
Yeah, and it does so by starting with this massive, just jarring paradox. So I want you to imagine for a second that someone you trust implicitly, someone who has always protected you, looks you in the eye and tells you to just walk straight into a lion's den.
Right, which sounds crazy.
Totally. Not to fight the lions either, to just surrender. They're basically asking you to willingly hand yourself over to a corrupt, ruthless empire that wants to destroy everything you stand for. I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive. It sounds like a trap.
Oh, it sounds like the absolute opposite of what a loving protector would ever ask you to do. And I think our immediate assumption, and certainly the assumption of the ancient Israelites, is that being sent into the heart of Babylon must be a punishment.
Like a divine timeout or something.
Yeah, exactly. But the core theme of today's sermon completely shifts that perspective. This exile to Babylon, it isn't about punishment. It is a meticulously designed period of refinement.
Refinement. Okay, but to really grasp the weight of that refinement, I feel like we have to look at the historical backdrop, starting with probably one of the most famous verses in the entire Bible, Jeremiah 29.
Oh, yeah, the classic.
Right. If you've ever been to a graduation party, you have seen this verse on a greeting card. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. We tend to read that as this really cozy personal guarantee that everything in life is just going to go our way.
We really do. We treat it like a divine promise for upward mobility.
Yes.
We assume it means, we'll get the promotion, the perfect house, the ideal life. But the sermon provides the actual gritty historical context here, which completely upends that cozy interpretation.
Because it wasn't spoken to comfortable people.
Exactly. This message was not delivered to people living their best lives. It was delivered to traumatized captives who had just been dragged away from their homes in Jerusalem. They were forced into exile in the pagan empire of Babylon.
And the instructions God gives them right before that famous promise, like in verses 4-7, they're wild.
They really are.
He tells these captives to build houses, plant gardens, get married, and actually pray for the peace and prosperity of Babylon, their enemy's city. Very city that just destroyed their homeland.
It is a staggering directive, if you think about it, praying for the economic and social success of your captors.
Yeah, and I have to push back on this a bit because reading that, it sounds an awful lot like God is just telling them to assimilate.
It does sound like that.
It feels like he's saying, look, you lost. Go ahead and chase the world's values now. If you can't beat the Babylonian Empire, just join them, blend in, and try to get rich.
And that is the exact trap the sermon warns us about. It's a remarkably common misinterpretation today, too. To illustrate this, the sermon references the late author Tim Keller and his concept of the centered church.
Okay.
Now, the centered church model essentially argues that Christians shouldn't withdraw from secular society into these isolated, holy huddles. But they also shouldn't simply mimic the surrounding culture. They're supposed to be in the center of the city, serving it and seeking its good.
Wait, let me stop you there just to make sure we're totally clear on this. When people misinterpret that centered church idea, what does that actually look like in practice?
In practice, it looks like modern believers using the idea of engaging culture as a sort of spiritual cover to ruthlessly chase secular wealth and status.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they read Jeremiah telling the Israelites to build houses and plant gardens, and they interpret it as a green light to prioritize their own comfort and career above all else.
So it becomes like I'm climbing the corporate ladder and buying a luxury car for the Lord.
Precisely. But the sermon sharply corrects this. Keller and the book of Jeremiah itself, they strictly warned against falling into the idolatry of the city.
So you can be there, but don't idolize it.
Yes, you are commanded to build a life. You can, and you should, enjoy the benefits of this city you live in. But the crucial distinction is that your career, the city's wealth, and the surrounding culture's values, they must never replace God as your ultimate priority.
Right.
You seek the city's peace, but you do not worship the city. And I think the most vital detail in the text is that this settling in Babylon was never intended to be permanent. God placed a strict 70-year timer on their exile.
Okay, so it's inherently temporary, but that brings up a much bigger question for me. If the stay in Babylon was always meant to be temporary, why put them there in the first place?
It's a great question.
I mean, why not refine them in a quiet desert or an isolated village? Why deliberately drop your people into the heart of these massive pagan superpower empires?
This is where the sermon introduces a geographic pattern that honestly provides a massive aha moment.
I love this part.
If you look at the greatest ancient empires, the ones that historically dominated the biblical narrative, you have Egypt, Babylon, and later Rome. And the common denominator among all three is that they are what we can call water cities.
Okay, break down the mechanics of a water city for us. How does that geography actually shape their culture?
Well, let's start with Egypt. The entire Egyptian empire relied on the predictable annual flooding of the Nile River.
Right.
The water literally rose up from the ground to irrigate the crops, making the soil incredibly fertile. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus even called Egypt the gift of the Nile.
Wow.
Then look at Babylon, located in Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia literally translates to the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates.
So again, water right there.
Exactly. A massive, predictable water source right there on the ground. And Rome built its global dominance through absolute control of the Mediterranean Sea, utilizing advanced naval fleets and trade routes.
So living one of these empires is essentially like having a state-of-the-art automatic underground sprinkler system for your entire civilization.
Yes.
You have total control. You never really have to worry about the weather because the resources are right at your feet, fully managed by human engineering.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. When you have an automatic sprinkler system, you never have to look up.
Oh, that's good.
And socially, psychologically, that breeds a culture of deep arrogance and self-worship. These empires believed they didn't need anything beyond their own power. Now, contrast that profound self-sufficiency with the land God originally gave his people Canaan, or what we call Palestine. We constantly hear it described as the land flowing with milk and honey.
Yeah, it sounds like an absolute paradise on paper.
It does, until you read the fine print.
Right.
The sermon points out a massive caveat found in Deuteronomy 11.14. It reveals that Canaan only flows with milk and honey if God provides the early and late rains.
Wait, really? So it's totally dependent on the weather?
Exactly. If the rain doesn't fall from the sky, the crops wither, the livestock perishes, and the milk and honey vanish. It is an environment entirely dependent on precipitation, not irrigation. That is a staggering contrast. God took a people who were growing accustomed to the self-sufficiency of water cities where they never had to look up and moved them to an environment where their literal survival dictated that they had to look up to the sky every single day.
And that geographic reality answers the question of why God utilized the Babylonian exile.
Oh, I see.
The purpose wasn't just to punish past mistakes. The purpose was to shatter their illusion of self-sufficiency. God placed them in a highly controlled environment designed to systematically strip away their reliance on earthly power, earthly wealth, and earthly political systems.
Just totally breaking them down.
Yes, in order to forge a 100% total reliance on him.
Okay, I understand the theology there, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. Because 100% reliance sounds completely exhausting.
It does.
It actually sounds impossible for human beings. If you and I are trusting God 99.9% of the time, shouldn't that be enough? I mean, think about a 24-karat gold ring. It is technically only 99.9% pure, yet we consider that the absolute standard of perfection.
Right, it's perfect gold.
Yeah. So why is 99.9% spiritual trust considered a failure?
The sermon anticipates that exact pushback, actually. And it answers it by moving away from metallurgy and into the realm of human relationships.
Okay.
It asks us to imagine a marriage. Let's say a couple is completely faithful to each other 99.99% of the year.
I mean, on paper, that sounds like a remarkably stable relationship.
But let's do the math on what 99.99% actually means in a 365-day year.
Oh.
It means that for 364 days and 15 hours, you are a perfectly loyal, devoted, and loving spouse. But for the remaining 9 hours of that year, you go out and sleep with other people.
Oh, wow. Okay, when you put it like that, the entire premise of the relationship collapses.
Exactly.
Those 9 hours don't just put a dent in a mostly good marriage, they destroy the marriage entirely. You can't offset blatant infidelity with good behavior the rest of the year.
You certainly can't. I mean, you wouldn't accept a spouse telling you, well, I was faithful for 364 days, so you need to overlook the 9 hours I spent with someone else.
No, absolutely not. That's grounds for divorce.
Right, because that fraction of a percent redefines the entire nature of the commitment. And the sermon connects this directly to spiritual idolatry. God isn't interested in 99.9% trust because that remaining 0.1% isn't just a margin of error, it is spiritual adultery.
Wow.
It signifies that there is still some earthly idol, some political safety net, some water city that we are reserving as our backup plan. God requires our adulteral set, 100%.
But, if we're being completely honest with ourselves and you, the listener, hitting that 100% mark is a lifelong, incredibly painful struggle.
Oh, absolutely.
We fail at it constantly. We default back to trusting our bank accounts or our careers. So how does God handle that gap? How are we not just instantly condemned while we're trying to reach that standard?
This is where the core message of the gospel gets woven into the sermon through the concept of justification.
Okay, justification. That's kind of a heavy theological term.
It is, but the sermon simplifies it beautifully.
Break that down for us. What does justification actually mean in an everyday context?
Think of it as a legal declaration in a courtroom. Imagine you are standing before a judge with a massive, life-ruining debt that you could never possibly repay.
Sounds stressful.
Very. But then someone else steps in, pays the debt in full, and the judge slams the gavel, declaring you cleared. You haven't suddenly become a perfect person who never makes financial mistakes, but your legal standing is secure.
I see.
The sermon notes that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross provided that righteous legal justification for us. Because of what Jesus accomplished, God has the divine legal right to patiently wait for us.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, he extends profound grace as we stumble, fail, and slowly learn to move toward that 100% devotion.
That reframes the entire struggle. It means the pressure to be instantly perfect is off, but the trajectory of growth is still required.
Exactly.
So let's assume the listener is on that trajectory. They are in their modern Babylon experiencing this refinement and learning to trust the rain instead of the sprinklers. Once that reliance starts taking root, what is the believer supposed to do?
That brings us to the motif of the new Exodus that runs through the entire biblical narrative. It is not just a single historical event where Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. It's actually a repeating pattern of behavior God demands from his people.
A repeating pattern of leaving empires behind.
Yes. In Exodus chapter 13, the clear command is, leave Egypt. Centuries later, in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 45, which is the anchor text for today's sermon, the command is, flee Babylon.
Right.
And then centuries after that, in the book of Revelation chapter 18, verse 4, the command is, come out of Rome.
Leave Egypt, flee Babylon, come out of Rome. The consistency is impossible to ignore. But why? What is it about these empires that requires God's people to constantly flee?
It's because empires, by their very nature, seduce us into finding our ultimate security in human power rather than divine provision.
Back to the sprinkler system.
Exactly. They offer safety, comfort, and status, but they demand our souls in exchange. The repeating call to flee is God's urgent warning to pull his people out of the idolatry of whatever the reigning superpower happens to be right before divine judgment falls on the inherent corruption of that empire.
Which brings us to a very practical, immediate question for you, the listener. The sermon specifically addresses living in today's global superpower, the United States.
Right.
When a modern believer reads a text that screams, flee Babylon, how literal is that? Like, are you supposed to draft a resignation letter, sell your suburban home, and move to a cabin in the woods to live off the grid?
The sermon is very careful to clarify that the answer is no. We have to balance this with the instruction from Jeremiah 29 to build houses and plant gardens.
Right, don't just abandon society.
Right, we live in this society. We hold jobs here. We participate in the economy. The command to flee is fundamentally an internal spiritual directive. We must constantly remind ourselves that this city, this nation, and this cultural moment are temporary. We are instructed to keep our hearts entirely untethered from the idols of the superpower.
Untethered, that's a great word. You can hold a job, but you cannot let that job hold your identity.
Exactly. You engage with the culture, but you remain spiritually detached enough that you are ready to leave it all behind mentally and spiritually the moment God asks you to.
But practically speaking, living untethered is a massive challenge. Finding that balance feels like walking a tightrope in a windstorm.
It really does.
If we detach too much, we become apathetic and lazy. If we lean in too much, we become idolaters who worship our 401ks.
Yes.
But the sermon doesn't just leave us with the theory, though. It offers two distinct, highly practical applications for surviving life in the empire.
The first application directly addresses that risk of apathy. It's about avoiding spiritual laziness.
Right.
Because it is incredibly tempting to hear, this world is temporary, and use that as an excuse to just check out.
Right.
To say, well, the empire is falling anyway, and God is in control, so why should I care about my job or my community?
It's the ultimate spiritual justification for just doing the bare minimum.
Exactly. And to dismantle that mindset, the sermon brings in the parable of the talents from Matthew chapter 25. It asks us to look at the behavior of a good steward.
Okay, yeah.
A faithful steward doesn't ignore the master's business. They treat the assets with intense care, passion, and excellence. They invest deeply, as if the business were their own.
So let's ground that in today's world. What does that actually look like for, say, a mid-level manager trying to apply this on a Tuesday morning?
Well, it means that if you are tasked with delivering a Q3 earnings report, you pour your energy into making it the best report possible. You lead your team with integrity. You care passionately about the quality of your work. But, and this is the untethered part, you remember that you do not own the company. You don't let the success of that Q3 report dictate your self-worth. And the moment the master returns and asks for the business back, or the moment your circumstances change, you surrender it immediately without having an existential crisis.
Oh, wow.
The sermon compares this posture to Lot leaving his home in Sodom. You manage the resources with excellence, but you hold everything with an open hand.
Care passionately, but surrender instantly. That is a difficult but beautiful tension to hold.
It is.
Now, managing our resources with an open hand is one challenge, but living in a modern empire also attacks our mental state. It is exhausting. The sheer volume of panic generated by the culture on a daily basis is just overwhelming.
Which leads to the second application.
Yeah.
Active mental resilience. This is drawn directly from Jeremiah 51.46, where the prophet gives a very specific warning.
What does he say?
He tells the people, do not lose heart or be afraid when rumors are heard in the land. One rumor comes this year, another the next. Rumors of violence in the land and of ruler against ruler.
That sounds shockingly modern. I mean, he is perfectly describing the modern 24-hour news cycle. Panic after panic, election cycle after election cycle, constant rumors of collapse.
The machinery of empires hasn't changed in thousands of years. The world will always generate rumors of violence and political chaos. The true test of a believer in Babylon is how they respond to that manufactured panic.
And this is where the sermon highlights an insight that is just brilliant. It uses this fascinating linguistic play on words in the Korean language to illustrate how we should handle that stress.
Yes, I love this part.
Right. Think about our natural human response when the weight of the world feels crushing. When the economy is shaking or we're dealing with intense personal grief, our default reaction is often a phrase like, "This is so hard, I could die."
It's a statement of total surrender to the circumstances. It's the language of defeat.
Exactly. And the sermon points out that the Korean equivalent for this feeling is pronounced something like "힘도 이어 죽겠다." It carries that heavy, suffocating despair. But here is the incredible pivot. With a very slight shift in pronunciation, with a deliberate pause to change your mental posture, that exact phrase transforms into 죽겠다. And that shifted phrase means, it is hard, but the Lord is in control.
That subtle shift is doing profound psychological and spiritual work.
It really is, because it completely rewires your brain's stress response. Notice what it doesn't do. It doesn't deny the reality of the pain. It still acknowledges that things are hard.
Yeah, it's not toxic positivity.
Right. It doesn't pretend that living in Babylon is fun or easy, but it actively shifts the ultimate authority away from the chaos of the news cycle and places it squarely in the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
It is the real-time, practical application of Philippians 4.6 and 7, guarding your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus while the empire around you loses its collective mind.
You are choosing not to be a victim of the empire's anxiety, but rather a witness to God's authority over the empire.
Wow, yeah.
When you practice that reframe, acknowledging the difficulty, but declaring his ultimate control, you are actively untethering your soul from the fear that Babylon runs on. You are surviving the refinement.
We have covered so much ground today. We've explored the paradox of settling in the city without worshiping it, the danger of relying on the water cities instead of trusting God for the rain, the necessity of 100% devotion, and the daily practice of living untethered from the panic of the modern empire.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And all of that brings us to the ultimate conclusion of today's sermon.
Yes, because when you understand the full picture, when you realize that the exile into Babylon is not a punishment, but a loving, meticulous refinement designed to bring you to total reliance on God, then the sermon's final thought carries incredible weight.
It really does.
It brings us straight to the promise of Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.
Whatever modern Babylon you find yourself navigating today, take comfort in that truth. The refinement is going to be hard. The environment might feel like a lion's den, but every single piece of it is ultimately working together for your good.